Well, I'm here at Kargatstein Park looking out over the water, and the more I look at the water, the more I realize how unpredictable water can be. If you've ever been on a boat before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're on the ship at one moment, it's calm, cool, collected. Sometimes it's like glass and you can't even tell where the horizon stops and the sky begins because it's just so reflective, so clear, and it's really some of the most beautiful sights you can ever see. But the water isn't always like that. At one moment it's glass, and at any given moment after that, it becomes a storm. This happened to me when I was coming back from camp on the Noatak River with my father-in-law. And it was one of the first times he was letting me drive the boat. And as we got out of the river and into the sound and we headed towards deeper water, the calm waters we were experiencing upriver stopped and the tall waves began. And before we knew it, I was in the middle of this crazy storm that I had no idea how to handle the boat inside of it. So water came splashing into the boat. It was knocking us around, pushing us back and forth. And naturally, I was super scared because I had no idea really what I was doing. I just remember my father-in-law telling me to stay focused on where I'm going and try to look at the waves and ride in between the waves so that we don't get blown offshore. Well, eventually we hit one wave that was so hard that it actually knocked our engine up and turned us the completely wrong direction. And when we landed, we were all of a sudden facing the waves, and waves began crashing into the boat on top of us. It was at this moment I let go of the wheel and I said, "Lance, you need to take this because I can't do this." And he told me to put my hands back on the wheel and get us to where we need to be. And so we had no other options at the moment. I grabbed the wheel, I continued throttling forward, and I saw that there was an old washed up barge on the side of the shore. And on the other side of this barge, there was a little clearing, and I could make it into this little clearing where there was calm water. So I aimed the boat in that direction, I ignored the waves, I ignored the wind, and I just put us right inside of that barge. And as soon as we got there, we hit calm water. And as soon as we hit calm water, I just turned off the engine and we stopped for a second. And me and Lance, we looked at each other, and after a couple moments, we both raised our hands up in the air and we gave out a big "Wow!" It was one of the most exciting times in my life, but I was so scared. I had no idea what I was doing. The only trust that I had in myself that I could get us there was that I had no other option at the moment, and also Lance was right there. If I needed him, I knew that he was going to help. Now, the more that I think about the story, the more I realize that there's this beautiful illustration of faith in the midst of that. The disciples oftentimes found themselves in less than ideal situations with Jesus on the water. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus and his disciples got off onto a boat, went out to sea, but there was one problem there. It wasn't the storm that was brewing. It wasn't anything that was outrageously dangerous. Their issue was that they didn't have any bread. Now, when you think about the actual context of this situation, here's the issue. The disciples have been walking with Jesus for years at this point. They not only saw Jesus do miracles, but they were actually an active part of the miracles that Jesus was doing. At that moment, they fed 5,000 people with just a piece of bread and a couple fish. They also fed 7,000 people with just as much food, and they collected baskets of food afterwards. This was one of the greatest miracles that Jesus has done. And the insane part about it was that the disciples were the one that were handing out the food to individuals. So they were active participants in the miracles that Jesus was doing. But the problem that they had on the boat with Jesus was that they forgot to bring bread with them. Now, I know you and me, we would never be worried about that if Jesus was with us, right? Because naturally, Jesus is with us, we're going to be okay. He can make bread come out of anything. But the disciples were more concerned about what they didn't have than what they did have. They had everything they needed in the boat with them, which was the bread of life, which was Jesus. But they began arguing amongst themselves, and they were saying, "Dude, we have no bread. What are we going to do? Who forgot to bring the bread?" And Jesus shared a couple really interesting words with them. He said, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod." Now, when I think about that moment, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod, What he's saying is, beware of the sin that these two people have made, the Pharisees and what Herod has made. And what was the common sin that they both had in common? At the end of the day, what that chalks up to is unbelief. The Pharisees studied Jesus their whole entire life, and yet when the Messiah was right in front of their face, they missed him. Herod missed Jesus. He didn't believe. The Pharisees didn't believe. And now you have the disciples who walked with Jesus, were participating in miracles, who sat by the campfires with Jesus, were taught at his feet. They enjoyed everyday life together, and yet they were falling into the same trap of unbelief. And what's so interesting is that the disciples had everything they needed right there. But they didn't have faith that Jesus was going to provide for them. They didn't have faith that Jesus was going to do what only Jesus could do. And so naturally, they freaked out. When it was me on that boat, there was a moment where I freaked out. The waves were coming head on. I saw how big they were. I saw how small I was. There was no way that I was going to be able to overcome the waves by myself. I wasn't skilled enough. I had no idea what I was doing. But Lance was telling me, put your hands back on the wheel, point us in the direction we're going, and get us there. And so I had no faith in myself, but I had faith knowing that Lance knew what he was talking about, and I can rely on his strength and believe that if anything happens, he's going to keep us upright and afloat. And then when we got there, everything was okay. This is often how life is, especially when you're doing something new, when you're starting off something that you just don't really know if this is the way you want to do things. You don't really know if this is God that's telling you to do it, but like you have this feeling and you're afraid to step out in faith. You're afraid of all the things that could go wrong. You're afraid of your own inability. You're afraid of lack of resources, or just not even knowing where to begin. But you have this feeling that God is calling you to something, and he's asking you to put your hands on the wheel and to keep going in the direction that he's leading you. And what we have to remember at these times is that it has nothing to do with our ability to do things. It has nothing to do with what we can control and what we can't control. We have to remember that at all times, Jesus is right there with us, that he's actually the one that's in control. And when we experience fear, when we experience the storms, when we experience the lack of food, when we experience the lack of necessities, that as long as Jesus is in the boat with us and he's directing us in our direction to go, we have everything we need. So what about you in your life? Are you in this moment where you feel like you're afraid of what's happening? Are you in this moment in your life where you think that you're not going to be able to make it in the direction that you're going to go? Are you trying to control the circumstances instead of letting Jesus control where you're moving? Because if you are, this is a wonderful sign and a wonderful opportunity for you to take a moment to reflect back that Jesus is good, he's moving with you, and when he's there, you have everything you need. And you're going to have that moment when you're on the other side of the barge, looking at the storm behind you, and knowing that Jesus brought you to safety, and that there's another storm ahead, and that you're going to get through that one as well. And Jesus will never leave you nor forsake you. And with the disciples, well, they lived to see another day. They never did get that bread that they wanted, but they got to the other side of the river, the other side of the lake, and they were sustained. They were given everything that they needed, and they learned a lesson along the way, to not fall into the sin of unbelief, but to lean in to what Jesus is doing, no matter how scary it is, and know that he's good and in control.